Imagine if one single letter, just one, had the power to reroute the entire course of human history. We usually expect history to pivot on a military order, a political speech, or a declaration of war. This specific event was none of those. It was simply a piece of administrative mail, an acceptance or rejection letter from an art school in Vienna, sent in 1907. That entirely routine, mundane desk task holds more weight than almost any battlefield decision of the 20th century. The young man waiting for that letter had no political ambitions. His goal was peaceful. He spent his time sketching, hoping for a quiet career painting historic buildings and city landscapes. The young teenager who actually submitted that portfolio was named Adolf Hitler. He had targeted one specific institution to launch his career, the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. His application was rejected, twice. It remains one of the most heavily analyzed failures in modern history. But what if that admissions clerk had decided differently? What would the last 100 years look like if that envelope had contained an acceptance? Let's step into a parallel timeline. Imagine the Academy reviews his portfolio and accepts him. He spends the next several years immersed in coursework. He studies perspective, color theory, and architectural design. His days are filled with creative competition and gallery exhibitions. He isn't attending radical political meetings or giving angry speeches. In this environment, his energy goes toward improving his brushwork. He doesn't spend his 20s searching for someone to blame for his failures. Eventually, he likely opens a small architectural studio and lives out a quiet, predictable life. In this alternate reality, the man who would become history's most notorious figure fades into the total obscurity of a completely normal citizen. But in our timeline, he faced that double rejection from the Academy. Without a degree or a profession, he fell into financial ruin. He lived in cheap hostels and survived by selling small, meager watercolor paintings to pedestrians on the street. Then, World War I erupted. For a young man adrift, the military provided structure and a violent purpose. His experiences in those trenches deeply influenced and permanently warped his developing worldview. The personal bitterness that started at the steps of the Art Academy hardened into a rigid ideology, perfectly timing itself with a looming era of global violence. However, history is rarely caused by one single person. Historians often point to the concept of systemic determinism, the idea that major events are driven by massive societal forces. This animated graphic illustrates how those terrifying conditions in early 20th century Europe were brewing no matter what career path that young man took. Germany faced a devastating defeat in the First World War, which was quickly followed by a total economic collapse. Millions of people lost their savings, their jobs, and their security. The public was desperate, starving, and increasingly open to extreme political solutions. That desperation bred severe political instability and a dangerous rise in extreme nationalism across the country. The powder keg of European collapse was already fully packed. It was ready to explode, even if the man who eventually lit the fuse was just quietly painting buildings in Timeline B. This forces us to look at both timelines and ask a difficult question about the nature of history itself. Would the Second World War still have erupted from the ashes of the Weimar Republic's economic and political collapse? With the nation so thoroughly fractured, it is entirely possible that another extremist leader would have simply stepped into the vacuum to harness that existing anger. And that leads to the most harrowing question of all. Without his specific, deeply personal hatred driving the state apparatus, would the Holocaust still have occurred, or would millions of lives have been spared? Because human events form an infinitely complex web of variables, we cannot guarantee that removing one dictator from the equation fixes the systemic rot of the entire era. We are left weighing the massive, unstoppable scale of geopolitical forces against the microscopic scale of a single personal decision. We will never truly know what would have happened in that alternate timeline. We expect history to turn on grand revolutions and enormous battles. The alternatives are much more chilling to consider. The fate of the entire 20th century may have hinged on a single administrative clerk's decision to mail a rejection letter.